And this is the case of the silver plate medal. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about tonight. And you'll notice it's a lot larger than a lot of people expect. So if you put it up next to my head, you can see this thing is a very, very showy piece. And there's not very many medals that are like this. When we think about them, we usually think about them as being kind of thick, heavy, but this one's really thin. Okay. Uh, and so it doesn't meet a lot of expectations. So we're going to tell a story about this. Okay, so what we're going to start talking about are American peace medals. Now, American peace medals are a very interesting element of numismatics or coin collecting. And there's a lot of people that collect these, and because they, more than any other form of of coin, they express relationships in very large scales. So they are not just other branches, numismatics, of course, the largest are coins. The other are just general medals like fair trade medals, and you get a medal for the biggest, um, beef cow that you have at the Strasbourg Fair or something like that. And those are highly collectible. And then there's uh, medals that commemorate the ascension of Queen Elizabeth, in 1950, things like that. But probably the most valuable of all numismatics, well, except for a few Japanese and Russian things, at least in the United States, are American peace medals. And generally they look like these up here. Generally they tend to be round, usually made out of silver, but occasionally you notice some of those are what are called bronzed copper. And there's even some that are made out of pewter. And these peace medals were given to indigenous leaders as a sign of friendship and alliance. And I say here either potential, in other words, you give them a medal hoping they'll join your cause, let's say in the French and Indian War, or it reinforces that alliance. For example, when the British would take over an area that was controlled uh, by France, Britain commanded or told all of the Indian chiefs in that area they had to turn over their French medals to the Brits, and then the Brits would replace them with British medals. And of course, a lot of the medals that the indigenous people kept and just didn't turn them in. And the British, when they got them, of course, they just melted them down. The only medal we're concerned with in our period, which is 1790 to 1970, actually is at the very first years during the Washington administration. And so these two medals here, this is the famous Washington Peace Medal that was made in large numbers. And it's kind of a weird thing. You notice it's got this frame around it. Excuse me. So how it was made, it was two thin sheets of silver, okay, that were rolled out or hammered out. And then they were hand engraved by a guy named Joseph Richardson in Philadelphia. And then they were put back to back, and then they put this frame around them. And then the frame had a suspensory loop at the top. So actually, you're dealing with three pieces of metal there. You've got the front, the obverse, the reverse, and the frame. And this is a 1792 one. Now, Indian peace medals were very, very important. This is the coronation of a Wendat Huron chief. And if you notice, everybody is standing in the back there with their top hats and their fancy coats with epaulets and everything, and their ceinture fléchés on. Around their neck are one or two round peace medals. And so this was expected whenever you were asserting your authority. Everybody would have to get dressed up in their outfits like this, and then wear their peace medal as a symbol of authority. Now, these peace medals tended to migrate. In other words, let's say the gentleman on the left had a cousin or something like that that would be sent on a trip to have to deal with the Cree. So that medal would be taken off from that chief, given to the ambassador. Okay, that would be worn by the ambassador, and then taken up to the Cree, and maybe with the agreements, that medal might end up going to a Cree chief. Then the Wendat would have to go back and ask the British government for more medals. And so the interesting thing is that these medals, per Indian chief would accumulate several. And so all of these people here, I guess, yeah, they all have at least two medals that they're wearing. So those of you that are interested in portraying a indigenous chief in the past, it would seem as though two medals rather than one. And I love the guy in the headdress. If you see in the back with the feathers, he's got an upright feather headdress with a silver headband around it, which I think is a fascinating piece. All kinds of interesting detail in these pictures. So making peace medals, generally the peace medals were struck. Now that's how a penny is made. Basically what you take is a billet of copper. It's been cut to the appropriate size called a slug. It's put in a die. Now the die has engraved on it the shape of, let's say, Abraham Lincoln's face and the date and things like that. And these are made by what were called die sinkers. Interesting enough, both of my grandfathers were originally trained as die sinkers. So there's a bit of that in my family. Others, usually pewter, were cast. And these were the cheapos that were, if the Brits were having a big peace conference, the main chiefs and other important delegates would be given silver, and then you get copper, and then the kind of lower warrior caste, I guess you could call it. Now they were given pewter ones, which was a lot easier to make, didn't cost anything, and you can make large numbers of them. And so these, you see all of these in the antiques trade. Now, I told you about some of them are a sandwich made out of two pieces of copper. But some of the later ones, and you can still get these on eBay and stuff, these were struck in the same mold as the original one, but they were struck in the 1840s, 1850s, 1870s, and some were even struck a few years ago. And these were then made out of copper. So it's interesting, are these replicas? Are they copies or just duplicates? So there's a lot of debate about these. And so none of those are considered exactly fakes, even though a Jefferson medal that about 10 years ago, you could buy brand new from the US Mint. It was struck in the original mold. So there's a lot of interesting nuances. So it's easy to buy original restrikes at gun shows on the internet and stuff like that. And I've had quite a few of them over the years. Now, not all were made out of solid metal. As I showed you on that first one, some of them were a sandwich of two pieces of silver that was framed. And others that were stuck in the same dies that I just told you about, instead of just having them as copper, they would put a plating of bronze over them. And the bronze kind of slowed down the oxidation. You know, copper will oxidize very, very quickly, but bronze gets a beautiful patina. And so they would fix it this way. And a lot of these replica medals that you can buy are made out of bronze copper. Now, faking metals is very, very widespread because, as I told you, they're the most expensive, and some of them are worth thousands and thousands of dollars. And so, this is a quote on the right-hand side by a authenticator. He's a guy that if you've got a metal that you want to have authenticated or so whether it's a fake or real one. You send it over to him, and you notice he says about 90% are fakes. And boy, did I buy a lot of fakes before I knew. And I still have this one over here on the left. This is a friendly association. Now, some of the medals were issued as gorgets. Now, a gorget, or in French, gorget, is an arc like a crescent moon with suspensory holes, two suspensory holes that are on each side. And this one here, the friendly association, was a Pennsylvania one, and it has a native chief and William Penn with a pipe and a fire representing permanence. And the originals on these are very, very valuable. The patina and everything on this and the damage and the use wear was gorgeous. So I bought it. I got ripped off, but I kept it just as a reminder of when I was younger. And it's beautiful. And it has a lot of things that once you figure out what you're doing, you can use to show that it's a fake. So let's start the adventure. So once again, it's me and Anna gallivanting around antiquing. And this one is in 1998. And we went down to the Stonehouse Antiques. This is in Chester, Vermont. And boy, a lot of stuff back in the day came out of there. Some of which are well documented with origins in New territory, and a few others out of Coas territory. But this isn't the case, but there's a guy there doesn't exhibit anymore. It was called Militaria, and he had high end 17th, 18th, 19th century military items, such as helmets and different types of medals and things like that. And he had gorgeous stuff. And occasionally he'd have a really nice engraved powder horn, and he would have some native things, beadwork. I remember seeing a lot of Iroquois beadwork at his place, so I always would stop there. And Anna, of course, she would move on and look at other stuff, and I would be studying everything. And away in the back, there was a case with that medal that I showed you. And I said, "Oh, that's a real tacky thing." But just in case, I started looking and looking carefully at it, and I said, "Huh, kind of." There's some stuff that doesn't make any sense. So this is a candidate medal, and so it's a silver oval, and this is the information that I could get off of it, immediately. And I'd never seen a Greenville medal before. I was familiar with the Washington medals, the one that were the two-piece that you'd known, but I just seen a picture of them. I never really knew much or anything about them. And so this is the types of medal that I was thinking about when I was looking at the Greenville. So I thought that, the Greenville medal, it's the right shape, it's big. And but these other ones, now I didn't know that they were two pieces of engraving together, but I thought this one doesn't have a frame around it. So I thought, well, that must be kind of tacky. I would expect that the Greenville would look the same way, because the back of the Washington medal, you notice, has a Great Seal of the United States. The Greenville medal had the Great Seal on both sides. So I said, I don't know. But there's something suspicious on it. And this is where it's important to know a lot of stuff about different things. And as I looked at it, I saw this little tear down in the side. So I called over one of the people that would unlock the case. I asked them to unlock the case. I got the medal out and I looked at it carefully. And this is kind of what I saw. Right down at the corner, there is a slit. And it's almost as if a piece of silver had disconnected from the whole piece. And I said, wow. Now, if that's a solid silver one, because remember, I was under the impression at that time that all George Washington era peace medals were made out of a single sheet of metal. I said, that looks an awful lot like a piece of British, what's called fused plate or Sheffield plate silver. I took my finger and I ran it through there, and I could pull it out just a little bit, that showed that it was a tiny, thin little piece. And I said, oh, that's really weird. So the price was good. It was sold as a reenactor medal. Still cost $100. The tiny rip in the silver's edge was intriguing because it called up an old memory. So I bought it on a whim. Because and I really didn't have the money in those days to blow on this kind of stuff. But I did anyway. So then the next thing, of course, is bringing it home, putting it under the scope. So this is a recreation of it. Anna took this picture just yesterday. Boy, getting old. But so I'm looking at it very carefully. And under the improved microscope, this is about 150 diopters or diameters expansion on it. The slit is very clear. And there's no question that that is a thin little piece that was soldered all the way around, because in other spots under the scope, you can actually see where that piece is actually, the solder that's holding on is beginning to fail. Now, Sheffield plate is a very important and beautiful form of British silver. It was only made by the Brits. The process was invented in 1742, but and so the idea was you got a piece of copper, okay, and you put it through a big roller mill and squeezed it all down and made it into a thin plate. Then you got a piece of silver and you rolled that into a thin plate. Then under either heat and pressure or a very huge roller mill with great big steel rollers that will generate a huge amount of heat when the two are going together. You can fuse them. That's why a Sheffield plate is sometimes called fuse plate. So you take the thin little piece of silver, lay it on top of the thicker piece of copper, and you put it through this pair of rollers that will go like that. It's sucked through and it comes out, and they're stuck together. And so you can see the beautiful work. This is a Sheffield plate candlestick dating to about 12 or 15 years later than the medal, made by a Sheffield plate maker, Matthew Bolton. Isn't that pretty? And so it was kind of weird because you don't think about silver plate, this kind of thing, as being in a Native American peace medal. Now this medal here is has been put into a stamp. It's been done all kinds of things into it. It's soldered together. But the thing is that the edge of this, you see that it's called a gadrooned edge. So what they do on these is they just roll out this beautiful gadrooned edge on it, and then they solder it all the way around, and that covers some of the flaws in it. So this all sent me back into my detective's library. And so the back row is all my books on 18th and 19th century silver, and the two on the front are on Indian silver. So I started doing my research. So here's a little primer, or as they say in England, primer, on Sheffield plate. Okay, so this is the sheet that comes out from that roller. Now you see down at the bottom, I call it double sandwich. What that means is that it's got a thin silver sheet on the top and on the bottom. And that process was developed after 1770. Before that, it was just single sandwich or copper with the silver on the top. Now you see when you got a double sandwich, you see if you look at the end over on the left there, if you look at the edge of it, copper is visible. So that's a big problem. There's a couple things you can do to kind of handle that. You can dip the thing in acid that will differentially erode the copper, but not the silver. And then you can take a burnisher and you can kind of push the thin silver sheets over to hide it. Okay, that's a very long, complex, time-consuming process. Another thing that you can do is you just take a piece of flattened silver wire and just solder it around the edge. And notice it's called a wrapped edge. So the interesting thing, if you've got a, let's say a circle of this stuff, what you do is you wrap it around the edge, okay? And you cut it to the length so it only has a very thin little joint. And then you put a wire around that. And then you put silver solder, a dorp of silver solder on top of it, okay, all the way around. And then you put it in the furnace and the whole thing, the silver solder melts and capillary action sucks the silver solder into the joint there between the original three-part sandwich and the wire edging. And the silver solder is melts at a much lower temperature than that. So in other words, you can do that to maybe 10 or 15 pieces, put them in the furnace in a stack, and you can have them all done. And you pull them out and it's gorgeous. But one of the problems is over time, the silver solder may tend to degrade, okay? Because it's got other metals in it. It's got a little bit more copper, and there's a few other things that are in it to lower the temperature. And so one of the ways that you can tell Sheffield plate is just take a small magnifying glass, maybe a 10x magnifying glass, when you're going out to an antique shop. And if you're trying to tell whether the thing is real solid silver or Sheffield, you just look at the joint and you go around. So that's what I remembered. Okay, that's a little light bulb, ding, that went off. Because I used to teach antiques and used to teach silver, historic silver, and so I remember that back from the good old days before I was sucked into the world of Abenaki world, and so I retained some of these former memories, and that's what called it out. So, a problem. The Greenville medal is Sheffield plate. There's no doubt about it. Okay, I've done a lot of authentication and appraisals and stuff like that. Sheffield plate was not made in the United States. Okay, now that doesn't make any sense because when you go read all the books, like the two I showed you on, so the Indian silver and Martha Hamilton's Silver in the Fur Trade, you read those, and these are all solid silver engraved by Joseph Richardson of Philadelphia. Joseph Richardson was a silversmith. So here we've got a real problem. Why is there one? Okay, yeah, the engraving could be Richardson, but the darn metal itself was made in England. So we've got a major disconnect. So I knew that something was really weird and interesting here. So I delved back into the literature a little bit. So here's the bottom line. Sheffield plates almost never counterfeited. These heavy rolling mills are gone. They were scrapped. So that's something that you just can't fake out in your backyard. Okay. Those roller mills, each of the rollers was probably, oh, I don't know, half a ton. And you can't fake that up by trying to hand planish them or something like that. You can make a gorgeous, perfectly faked uh, Joseph Richardson medal easily with just the equipment that any silversmith would have. Double sandwich Sheffield plate was made from 1790 to 1840 when it was replaced by electroplating. And that's all your regular silver plate you've got today is all electroplated. Totally different process, has a different sheen, everything else is different about it. So therefore the metal could be no later than 1840. Okay. Why would anybody fake up a metal in 1840? It wasn't worth it. Okay. So we've got a real dilemma here. So, what the hell's going on? So then I go back and I had to go online. Okay. I know even the Dark Academy has to go online occasionally. And here's a reference that is a big long treatise talking about counterfeit. And if you notice, the metal that immediately followed the Greenville medal was struck by Matthew Bolton in Birmingham, England. Now, in other words, that was a die. So I think what happened is that they had the die made in the United States. They sent it over to England, and they had Matthew Bolton, who had the equipment to turn these out in large numbers by using basically a mechanical press. Okay, but so the thing is that here's a precedent immediately after the Greenville medal that involved a Birmingham silversmith. Now the question is, who is Matthew Bolton? So this is in Seymour Weiler's that's the basic book on antique silver, published a long time ago. And in the back of it, it has all the Sheffield and other silversmiths marks. So I wanted to find out who Matthew Bolton was. And OMG, who is Matthew Bolton? Look up at the top. He was Sheffield plater. I go on his biography, and he was one of the largest Sheffield plate makers in England. And he's the guy that made that candlestick that I showed you a little bit earlier. And so now it's got his mark on it. The metal does not have his mark. So here we go. So somebody was communicating before the metal that was struck at Birmingham with Matthew Bolton, obviously, to get to set up the dies and blah blah all that stuff. Probably while the Greenville medals were being made. So we got the connection now between the two. So here's the Sherlock Holmes deduction. The Greenville medal was made with an impossible to counterfeit technology. Had to be before 1840. The 1790s medals were made in all different ways. Okay. And the 1790s struck medals were made by Matthew Bolton. Matthew Bolton was a major producer of silver plate. And we would infer from this line of reasoning that the Greenville medals were made by Matthew Bolton. Now, that doesn't say anything about the engraved design. So I've seen Matthew Bolton's work. It's as good as anything in the world at the time. So it could have been engraved by him, or they could just ship a whole defecation load of these things back to the U.S. and Joseph Richardson could engrave them. But nevertheless, this is cannot be a fake. It cannot be made after 1840. So my inference is that a lot of these other metals, Greenville metals, and I think I think at one time there were 6. I think there might be more now. We got to find those and put them under the scope to see. So if any others were made, remember the third number 3 there, they're made handmade in many different ways. So some of them could be solid silver. But this is one that was made in a cheapo way that only had silver on the top, bottom, and a little strip around the outside. So by doing this analysis here, we've authenticated it. And this is the information that if we were going to put this in a museum, along with all the authenticated material behind it, we would be able to make a good case for it. Which then leads us back to the puzzle of what in the heck is a Treaty of Greenville medal doing with a Vermont provenance that came out of a house, an old house, descended in an old house in Vermont. So the bottom line is that the medal that we have here is a interesting puzzle. Did it come from Euro-America? Was there a soldier that attended the Treaty of Greenville ceremony that somehow got one brought back? Probably not. I would say that the most probable way that it ever happened was an indigenous person brought it back, or I remember I told you at the very beginning that that medals got around. So it may have been that one of the treaty medal owners had to send some kind of a announcement or some kind of 19th century alliance issue to Missisquoi or maybe even to Coas for something. And that brought it into this area. And then it got into Euro-American hands, ended up in the antique shop. Another kind of parallel way that we could think about it is that the ELNU application or petition for recognition had a story about a native chief who came to Bellows Falls to die, and the description that referred to talked about him having a George III medal. And so somewhere buried in probably the Catholic cemetery in Bellows Falls is a silver George III medal. So there is one we know of, at least down here. So why not another? And so, with that, we'll end the program, and we can